It was a moonless night in the small, isolated town of Ravenwood. The streets were silent. The only sounds were the whispers of the wind as it danced through the treetops. Far away, a wolf howled, its mournful cry echoing through the darkness. In one of the town's modest houses, a young woman named Emma tossed and turned in her bed, troubled by a recurring nightmare that seemed to haunt her every night. The nightmare was always the same. She found herself in a mist-shrouded forest, the gnarled trees casting long, menacing shadows across the ground. The air was thick with an oppressive stillness, and the only sound was the hollow echo of her own footsteps. She wandered aimlessly through the mist, her heart racing with a sense of pervasive dread that seemed to seep into her very bones. As she ventured deeper into the woods, she became aware of a figure that loomed in the shadows, its presence filled with a haunting, otherworldly malevolence. The figure's eyes gleamed with an icy light, and its movements were shrouded in an eerie, otherworldly blur. It was always just out of reach, a phantom presence that seemed to hunger for her very soul. Every night, the nightmare left Emma with a lingering sense of terror that clung to her like a shroud. She tried to dismiss it as nothing more than a figment of her imagination, but the feeling of foreboding was unshakable. It was as if the nightmare had seeped into the fabric of her reality, its presence an unsettling reminder of the darkness that lay within point one night. As Emma lay in bed, staring at the ceiling with unblinking eyes, a sudden sound broke the silence. It was a low, guttural moan that seemed to fill the room with an otherworldly chill. She sat up, her heart pounding in her chest, and as she glanced around the darkened room, a figure materialized in the corner, its form shrouded in a haunting, ethereal glow. The figure's eyes gleamed with a malevolent light, and its movements were filled with a grotesque, otherworldly grace. It seemed to beckon to her, its form a haunting reminder of the nightmares that had plagued her for so long. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, and a sense of terror gripped Emma's heart as she realized that this was no mere figment of her imagination. It was something beyond her understanding, something that defied the very fabric of reality. As the figure drew closer, Emma's heart raced with a raw, unadulterated fear, the presence of the otherworldly essence enveloping her with a suffocating grip. She stumbled back, her eyes wide with terror, as the figure reached out with gnarled, claw-like fingers. Its touch seemed to sear her very soul, and she let out a haunting scream that echoed through the empty, silent house. And then, with a jolt, Emma awoke from her nightmare, her heart racing and her body slick with a cold sweat. She trembled with an unshakable sense of terror, the otherworldly presence of the figure lingering in the recesses of her mind. She knew that what she had seen was not a mere dream. It was a portent of darkness that had seeped into the very fabric of her existence. As the days passed, Emma's sense of terror seemed to grow with every passing moment. She tried to rationalize the nightmare and the haunting figure that had invaded her reality, but the feeling of foreboding was unyielding. It was as if the presence of the otherworldly entity had woven itself into the very fabric of her being, refusing to let go of its grip. One night, as Emma lay in bed, the oppressive silence seemed to weigh heavy on her heart. She tossed and turned, unable to shake the lingering sense of dread that clung to her like a shroud. And then, as she drifted into a fitful sleep, the nightmare returned with a relentless force. She found herself once again in the mist-shrouded forest, the gnarled trees casting menacing, elongated shadows across the ground. The air was filled with an oppressive stillness, and the only sound was the hollow echo of her own footsteps. She ventured deeper into the woods, her heart racing with a sense of unyielding dread. As she moved through the shifting mist, the figure reappeared before her, its eyes gleaming with an icy, malevolent light. Its form exuded a haunting, otherworldly presence, and Emma's heart raced with unyielding terror. She stumbled back, her breath coming in ragged, frantic gasps, but the figure seemed to loom closer, its presence suffocating and heavy. With a surge of terror, Emma turned and fled through the shifting mist, the figure's hollow, echoing footsteps following her through the oppressive darkness. She ran with unyielding desperation, her heart pounding in her chest, but the figure seemed to gain on her with its grotesque, otherworldly movements that defied the very fabric of reality. And then, with a jolt, Emma awoke, her heart racing and her body slick with a cold sweat. The feeling of terror lingered, suffocating and unyielding, and she knew that the nightmare and the presence of the otherworldly figure had become an inescapable force that gripped her very soul. As the nights passed, the nightmare continued to haunt Emma with relentless force, its presence seeping into the very fabric of her being. The figure loomed in the recesses of her mind, its haunting, otherworldly gaze seemingly omnipresent. She struggled to find a sense of peace, but the unyielding grip of terror seemed to grow with every passing moment. One night, as Emma lay in bed, the figure materialized once again in the dim, oppressive shadows of her room. Its form exuded a haunting, otherworldly glow, and its eyes gleamed with an icy, malevolent light. The air seemed thick with an unnatural stillness, and a sense of unyielding terror gripped Emma's heart as she realized that the figure was no longer confined to the realm of her nightmares. With a surge of raw, unadulterated fear, Emma stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure seemed to beckon to her with a haunting, ethereal presence, its movements filled with a grotesque grace that defied understanding. Its chilling presence seemed to sear her very soul, and as she looked into its vacant eyes, she felt a relentless force that defied the very fabric of reality. And then, with a gut-wrenching moan, the figure reached out with gnarled, claw-like fingers, its touch suffocating and heavy. Emma's heart raced with an unyielding sense of terror, the presence of the otherworldly entity enveloping her with a suffocating grip. She stumbled back, her eyes wide with fear, as the figure closed in with an insatiable yearning that seemed to consume her very essence. In a surge of desperation, Emma fled through the oppressive darkness, her breath coming in ragged, frantic gasps. The figure loomed closer with its haunting, otherworldly gaze, its presence unyielding and malevolent. The air was thick with an unshakable sense of dread, and Emma knew that there was no escape from the haunting, otherworldly force that had become a relentless force within her reality. As she raced through the empty, silent rooms, the otherworldly presence seemed to sear her very soul, its malevolent, haunting gaze following her every step. Her heart pounded in her chest, the lingering sense of terror gripping her with an unyielding force. She knew that what she had seen was not a mere nightmare. It was a sinister, inescapable force that had seeped into her very being. And then, with a bone-chilling moan, the figure materialized once again before her, its form shrouded in a haunting, ethereal glow. Emma stumbled back, her breath coming in ragged gasps, and as the figure reached out with an insatiable yearning, her world was consumed by a darkness that defied understanding. The figure loomed closer, its presence an unsettling reminder of the nightmares that had plagued Emma for so long. The air was thick with an oppressive stillness, and a sense of foreboding settled over her, suffocating and unyielding. She knew that there was no escape from the haunting, otherworldly force that had become an inescapable presence within her reality.